What if I told you the hardest part of anxiety recovery isn't just about learning the solution, but what happens after? Believe it or not, knowing the solution is just the first step in the healing journey. What do you do after you know the solution? The recovery journey in itself is an experience alone. It can feel frustrating, it feels windy, and sometimes you can just feel like you're lost, especially when you're dealing with these intense panic attacks, these intense physical symptoms, intrusive thoughts, the depersonalization, derealization. Many people try to measure their progress based on how they're feeling. But even when you're making progress, recovery can feel like an up and down affair. You'll still be experiencing high symptoms and then low symptoms. So how do you gauge the recovery journey? Well, in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the 9 stages of healing and growth. Whatever you're dealing with, this video is going to break down how the recovery journey looks like after helping thousands of people. I have never gone this deep before in the recovery journey. I'm going to be sharing with you when symptoms start disappearing, when do a lot of people get stuck, what to expect when on the healing journey. And so the purpose of this video is to give you some clarity so that you don't feel confused. This is going to be an in-depth masterclass. Now you might be wondering, okay, why is Shaan doing this? Why is he creating such an in-depth masterclass? Well, the reason is simple. There are more anxiety experts than ever before, and yet there's more mistrust on the internet than there ever has been. So my focus is on giving you as much value, showing you what to expect on the healing journey, just helping you get the confidence and clarity so that you could start your journey. Now, as you're going through this journey, 2 things can happen. You can get everything you need from this video and you are on the recovery journey and you're good to go, or you reach out for help in the future. And if you do that, you don't start at 0. So either way, it's a win-win for you. So here's what I recommend. This is going to be an in-depth video, so make sure to save this video so that you can watch it again in the future. As you're going on the healing journey, there will be things that are very relevant and will make sense to you on the healing journey, and other things that might not feel very relevant or useful. And what's going to happen is that as you're going on the healing journey, as you go through these different stages, different things at different times will make more sense. So you'll go back to watching this video and you'll start to understand what I mean in the later stages of healing. Make sure to watch the Anxiety Recovery Masterclass first before watching this video. The Anxiety Recovery Masterclass is going to give you the solution to overcoming your symptoms. It's going to help you understand the mechanics of anxiety, why you're experiencing these intense symptoms, how to begin reversing the cycle, and how to deal with certain setbacks. Now, as you watch that video, come back to this one and this will show you what the recovery roadmap looks like, what the journey looks like. Recovery is 2 parts. Number 1 is understanding what's going on and learning the solution. And then number 2, beginning and embarking on your healing journey so that you can overcome these symptoms and go back to living. So make sure to watch it in that order. Watch the masterclass first, then this video. What I'm going to be sharing with you in this video isn't just from my own personal experience. It's after helping thousands of people overcome their symptoms and go back to living. Believe it or not, we're with people every stage of the healing journey. And after you do this for so long, you start seeing patterns. You start seeing certain things surface up during different stages. And so what we have done is that we've compiled all this information from the years of helping people around the healing journey and basically structured it in this video to make it concise, easily digestible, and something that you can practically use for your healing journey. Now, when I was dealing with anxiety, I didn't even know it was anxiety. It started off as a panic attack, and I was convinced that I had actually something physical going on with me. It took me a long time to realize what I was dealing with was anxiety. I spent a lot of money. I did a lot of unnecessary tests and medical procedures. I went to therapists. I went to alternative medicine. I Google searched. I did everything I could. And then when I realized it was anxiety, I kind of felt this breath of fresh air. I felt like I could finally relax and be like, okay, it's anxiety. Now I know what to do. And I naively thought that if I just knew it was anxiety, I was able to overcome it and go back to living. If I just knew the solution, I can go back to living. But what that was is that was actually the beginning steps of my healing journey. As I was desensitizing my nervous system, immersing myself back into life, certain things were surfacing up. And because I didn't know what the recovery roadmap looked like, a lot of times things that were happening on the healing journey that were totally normal, I sometimes would internalize it and think that I did something wrong, or I felt like the solution that I was using just wasn't enough, and maybe I had to find a different solution. All that would do is just make me spiral. It would make me lose confidence in myself. It would cause unnecessary pressure and stress. If I could have had somebody in my journey explain to me what to expect on the healing journey, I wouldn't have spent so much time guessing or identifying, am I going the right direction? Am I not? Is this normal? Is this not? If I just had proper expectations on what to expect on the healing journey, it would have saved me a lot of headache. Now, before we jump into the steps, let's set some expectations. Number one, this idea that healing is overnight or it's just a quick fix is unrealistic. Recovery is not an overnight fix. Nor is recovery like a broken bone where you put a cast and it just heals linearly. Oftentimes, recovery feels like you're going 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. You make some progress, but then another problem surfaces up. Think of it as peeling an onion. You're going through different layers. Sometimes people just think if I can just overcome my symptoms, everything goes back to normal. But it's deeper than that. Even when the symptoms go away, there's going to be other things that surface up. And so it's important to understand what forces are at play. But that's also important to recognize that this isn't an overnight fix. As you know that this is a process, a lot of people are in such desperate need for help because what they're feeling is so debilitating. As you're dealing with these symptoms, they can feel so overwhelming. You're just focused on the finish line. You just want to focus on overcoming this as quickly as possible and getting through the finish line. The truth is that this process, there is no finish line. See, look at it this way. Your recovery is like this growth journey, right? The recovery journey ends, but the growth journey still continues. What's going to happen is that your recovery journey is going to change to a growth journey. It's no longer going to be about these symptoms. It's going to be no longer about anxiety, but it's going to be about other things that are surfacing up. What are some behaviors and patterns and loops that you've had that reinforce the cycle and that may also be reinforcing other parts in your life that might be holding you back? Now, you don't need to jump in that right now. Your biggest focus is on overcoming these symptoms. I know that's your immediate focus right now. I'm going to be showing you what the recovery journey looks like. But have the proper expectation that this isn't a finish line per se. This is a process. You're going to go through the healing journey. The healing journey will pass on its own, but the journey will still continue. And I'll give you some practical examples of how this looks later in the video as well. The next expectation to set is that everybody goes through these steps. There's not a situation where somebody skips a step. It's not like somebody skips a stage and just moves on really quickly. Everybody goes through these stages. Now, how long you are in each stage depends individual to individual. For some people, they might feel difficulty in one of the stages, but then other stages they're able to pass through very quickly. Everyone is different. For me personally, the beginning stages of healing were the hardest for me. It was the most difficult. The later parts of the healing journey were actually a lot easier for me. What I've actually found for most people is that sometimes it's flipped. Sometimes it's the later stages of the healing journey, but everyone's different. But don't think about it as there's a way you can skip the step or there's any way you can cut corners. You have to go through every stage. Just the duration of how long you go through each stage depends person by person. The next expectation to set. These stages that I'm going to show you, it's just a map. It's just a map of the healing journey. But don't confuse the map with the terrain. People become so hyper fixated on the recovery journey that they're trying to identify exactly where they are on each stage. The whole purpose of showing you the stages is just to show you a general view of what the recovery journey looks like. That doesn't mean you have to identify correctly which stage you're at. And if I'm being fully honest with you, with helping people around the world, especially when people are in the beginning stages, the stage that you're at, most people aren't even that good at identifying what stage they're in. So as I'm going to be going through the stages, you might be like, oh, I'm at stage 3, or I might be at stage 4. What I actually find when we're helping people on the healing journey is that they're actually not even at stage 1. If you feel like you're at a certain stage, that's fine, but don't be too fixated on it. Don't try to come up and say, I'm at stage 4. Why am I having difficulty going to stage 5? What I'm trying to show you is just a general map. But the terrain is different for everybody, right? You can't look at a map and say, okay, this is exactly what I'm going to experience. It's just to point a general direction of where to go. It's more of a compass. Understanding the recovery roadmap doesn't remove the difficulty in the healing journey. But what I'm trying to do in this video is to help remove some confusion. And the last thing before we get started, as always, make sure to go to your doctors and get everything ruled out. Don't use these videos as a substitute. Make sure you've at least gotten a clean bill of health, or the doctor said it's anxiety, or the doctor doesn't seem very concerned by it. They might just say it's stress, or that it's nothing that serious, or there's nothing they can do. That's often an indicator that what you're dealing with is a nervous system issue. And finally, like I mentioned, if you haven't already, watch the recovery roadmap. I'm going to expect that you know the principles I'm sharing. And if you haven't watched that video, it's going to be difficult for you to understand what I'm referring to in these videos, because I'm going to be talking about nervous system sensitization, how the recovery journey looks like, and that requires you to understand the mechanics of anxiety. So with that said, let's get into the 9 stages of healing and growth. Now, in these 9 stages of healing and growth, we're going to separate them into 2 categories. Stages 1 through 5 has to do with stabilization and anxiety recovery. It's in these first 5 stages that you begin overcoming your symptoms. This is how you understand the mechanics of anxiety. You learn how to respond. You see the symptoms subside. You see them go away over time. You learn to deal with setbacks. And also, this is where you go back to living. If you ever feel like anxiety has held you back, you stopped doing things, you stopped driving, you stopped going to the grocery store, you basically became agoraphobic where you wouldn't even leave your house. It's in these first 5 stages that you regain your life. It's in these first 5 stages we talk about desensitizing your nervous system. Basically, your body and mind are sending all these false alarms. And these false alarms are showing up in intense panic attacks, physical symptoms, intrusive thoughts, the DPDR. It's about calming those nerves down. It's about calming those false alarms. Now, the next stages 5 through 9, stage 5, by the way, part of that is anxiety recovery, but part of that after is about going beyond recovery and growth and thriving. It's about going back to living. When you live a fulfilling life, when you do everything based on your terms, you're going to face different challenges. And what happens is that even when people come out of the cycle, when people recover, they have a little bit of fear of pushing themselves, of going further, because they're always concerned about the fact of what happens if I fall back into the cycle. An example would be like you tried to do something before, but then let's say you're trying to do a jump of some sort, but then you got injured, you got hurt really bad. And that experience was a little bit traumatizing for you. So the next time you go into an environment or a similar environment where, let's say you have to do an athletic jump or something like that, you'll have that fear of what happens if I fall back into and injure myself. It's kind of the same principle here. How do you go back to living and have the tools that you need, not just to recover, not just to stabilize? You learn that from stages 1 through 5. But how are you able to deal with challenges, and how are you able to expand your capacity? And so the next stages is about going beyond recovery. It's about learning to thrive, no longer just managing, no longer just being in stability. Now, the important thing to understand that these 2 bigger categories affect each other. That means that while you're on the stabilization journey, as you're on the anxiety recovery journey, you will have opportunities where you can learn things and grow. You will learn certain habits that you've developed that held you back from anxiety recovery, and you'll be able to see other patterns that show up in different parts of your life. So the growth journey isn't exclusive to, stages 5 through 9. You're going to be learning a lot in the recovery journey. The same way is also true for the growth journey. Even when you pass anxiety recovery, you're going to continue growing, and that version of you, these higher versions of you, will help supplement your healing journey as well. Don't think that you have to be in the anxiety recovery journey and that means you're not experiencing symptoms. And in order to get to the next journey, you have to have your symptoms gone for good. What we find is that what happens is that people have their symptoms subside. They're not fully gone. They're still dealing with a little bit. And then what happens is they start the growth journey. They go beyond anxiety recovery. And what happens is as they do that, they make other things more important than their symptoms. And then what happens is that, ironically, their symptoms end up subsiding. But now they're on a growth journey. They're no longer on an anxiety recovery journey. So to summarize this, think of this as one journey. This is one journey. This is one life. The recovery journey is where you're going to be. The recovery journey ends, but the journey of life still continues. And so you're going to be still growing there. It's not going to be focused on anxiety recovery, but it's going to be focused on deeper layers. Who are you? This is where you can become the best version of yourself. Now, again, I know you're focused on overcoming these symptoms. I know who exactly is watching these videos. So I'm going to focus heavily on the first 5 stages. So let's get it started. Now, before we go into stage 1, let's talk about how people even fall into the anxiety cycle. See, when people fall in, what makes people fall in so hard into the anxiety cycle is because they often don't know what's happening. The pattern that we tend to see, and something that I dealt with myself, is that what happens is that people start dealing with certain stressors. This could be relationship stuff. This can be work stuff. This can be a health scare. These could be small stressors that build up. This can be a big stressor all at once. And so what happens is that people are living their lives. They might be someone who has dealt with anxiety in the past, or they might be someone like me who never really identified with anxiety. What happens is that that stress builds up over time. And then what happens is that when you hit that stress threshold, what happens is your body floods a bunch of adrenaline. This is where people often experience their very first panic attack. Now, the ironic thing about experiencing your panic attack is that it's not normally in a situation that's high stakes. What happens is that people can experience their first panic attack while just driving home from work, while having dinner with friends, when just trying to relax. And so what happens is that most people fall into the anxiety cycle through a panic attack. Now, it's important to understand that not everybody falls in with the panic attack. Don't think that if you didn't fall in with the panic attack, that somehow you're different or unique. Everybody's body manifests anxiety in different ways. Some people, their body just will never produce a panic attack. It's just not built that way. That doesn't mean they're struggling any less, or it doesn't mean that what they're dealing with is any less severe than someone dealing with panic attacks. It's just the way your body is manifesting these symptoms. Some people experience intense panic attacks. Some people feel intense depersonalization, derealization. Some people's mind goes 24/7. For some people, it's a little bit of everything. And so regardless of what you're experiencing, focus is the idea that it doesn't always have to be a panic attack. But if I had to give a rough estimate, I would say maybe about 70% of people that we work with fall in through a panic attack. And so because I'm going to be talking more towards those 70%, don't think that if you haven't had a panic attack that this doesn't apply to you. Basically, you hit a stress threshold, you feel intense anxiety, and you experience intense symptoms, which are generally physical symptoms. Your mind starts racing. You might not realize your mind is racing. You might think that you're just trying to figure things out, but your mind is running on adrenaline. And then people can also experience depersonalization, derealization. So what happens is that people experience their very first panic attack. And the scary part about all this is that they often don't know it was a panic attack. If you've ever had a panic attack, it can feel like you're dying. So you have no idea what's happening. And most people are convinced they're dying in that moment. So what will happen is they will rush to the ER, they will call an ambulance, they will try to figure out what's going on. Now, when they have that panic attack, something interesting happens. Your nervous system becomes sensitized. It becomes more sensitive to stress. That's where things get really interesting because a panic attack starts and ends. But what happens is that people start feeling off after the panic attack. They don't feel right. They feel like still something is wrong. And deep down in the back of their mind, they know that if I just had a panic attack, what's stopping it from happening again? I can't run away from a panic attack, right? No matter where I go, I'll have a panic attack. And what if I have a panic attack while I'm driving again and I lose control? And so what happens is that this fear tends to build up over time. And what happens naturally, this concern that occurs in your mind happens that you end up having a second panic attack. Now, you have been concerned about things before in your life and it didn't manifest in a panic attack. So why is it that you're experiencing a second panic attack even though you're concerned? Well, after that first panic attack, your nervous system becomes sensitized. And so even just the small concern that what if this comes back is enough to trigger another one. What happens here is that a lot of people's anxiety tends to generalize. So what happens is that they have the panic attack, it's isolated, it starts and it stops. And then what happens is that the panic attack tends to generalize. Now it's turning to a generalized anxiety disorder. You're noticing that you're experiencing symptoms all the time. You're just feeling off all the time. Your mind is racing. And it tends to be this level that's occurring all day. Sometimes they'll find some relief in the evenings. Sometimes they might find little glimpses of relief throughout the day. Sometimes they won't find any relief. This is where they start getting concerned. This is where people really start believing that what they're dealing with is something physical. So they do the responsible thing here, which is they start going to their doctors. They go to their doctors, they get their tests, they make sure nothing is wrong. Sometimes when people are dealing with intense anxiety, they're expecting to find something wrong. They're so aware that what they're dealing with is so intense that there's no way that these tests are not going to find anything. People that are struggling with anxiety, when they go through their tests, their doctors look at it and the doctors say, no, you're fine. Everything's okay. For an anxiety sufferer, this is very difficult to accept because what they're dealing with is so intense. They might feel some relief in the moment, but then they're also concerned with the fact that, what do you mean? Like, why isn't this going away? What can I do to make this go away? They naturally start fearing this idea of like, am I always going to deal with this? And they may start convincing themselves that maybe the doctor is incompetent or the doctor is missing something and this is something intense. So this is where they often go for second tests, for third checkups. They start really hounding their doctor, trying to figure out what's going on. And what happens is doctors at this point start to get a little bit frustrated. They know that everything is fine, everything is good. And what the doctors will often say is that what you're dealing with is anxiety. Now, when somebody is new in this cycle, they might be thinking, wait, I'm not like anxious. I'm anxious because of how I feel. I'm not anxious because I'm just anxious. I've never dealt with this before. If you were dealing with this as well, you would also be anxious. But what the doctor is really trying to say is that your nervous system is sensitized. And these symptoms that you're experiencing is not a physiological disorder or anything physiologically wrong. These symptoms you're experiencing, you're treating it as a threat, but there's nothing wrong. These are harmless. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but there's nothing wrong with you. You're healthy. There's two things they can do. They can recommend a therapist, talk through some stuff, maybe some childhood trauma stuff, or medication. Besides that, their hands are tied when it comes to this kind of stuff. They can also do surgery, but what are they going to do here in this case, right? So there's nothing, the surgical intervention doesn't apply here. So all they can really offer is medicine or a therapist. Now, a lot of people that I find that are dealing with this are medication averse. They don't want to do that. So they will try to do other things first. They will often go to their therapist and they will still be a little bit confused. They'll wonder, why is it that I'm experiencing such symptoms and I'm talking to somebody about some childhood stuff or stuff from the past? And so they'll go to therapists. Therapists will often give some breathing exercises, some talk therapy, maybe going into some childhood trauma stuff. And oftentimes for these individuals, it's not very effective. And so they've gone to doctors, they've gone to therapists, there's no help, they're not sure what's going on. Many times these individuals will try medication. And what will happen is that sometimes medication will provide some relief, but oftentimes the medication will just make them feel numb. They will not feel the anxiety per se, but they often might not feel anything. And so what happens, a lot of people, like myself included, they will often go into alternative medicine, right? These chiropractors, these naturopaths, these functional doctors. The people that they tend to work with are people that feel abandoned by the medical industry, where they feel like they're not getting the help they need, so they go to alternative practitioners. This is where people try supplements. They try, GABA, they try magnesium, they try ashwagandha, then they try acupuncture, they try breathing exercises, they try meditation, they try diet changes, they try all these different things, adjustments, chiropractic adjustments. They try all these different things. And what happens is they often spend a lot of money. And what they find is that, yes, these things are nice for life, but it's not solving the problem. Many times people are still not even convinced it's anxiety. They think it's something else because they're used to thinking anxiety is in the mind, right? And in many ways, when we're talking about anxiety, we are talking about anxiety as an emotion. But remember from the masterclass that I mentioned, what you're really dealing with is a nervous system issue. This is where they start Google searching, they start going on YouTube, And then this is where they find my content. And then they start getting a good idea that this is anxiety. Oftentimes people in the beginning don't even know it's anxiety, or they have to believe what they're going through is anxiety, but they're not understanding how is anxiety creating these symptoms. So the whole purpose of this channel, the whole purpose of you watching this is to really get people to begin the healing journey, which is helping them finally understand the fact that what they're dealing with is anxiety. Now, this is where we officially begin step one, which is learning that this is anxiety. And that was the whole purpose of creating this channel, helping you understand how anxiety truly works. So many people think anxiety is just an emotion, but what you're dealing with is a nervous system issue. This doesn't just explain when the doctors say it's anxiety, but you'll also start noticing that what you're dealing with is very similar to what people that have fibromyalgia, POTS, chronic fatigue, chronic pain, panic disorder, all these different things, OCD, what they're really dealing with at a fundamental level is that their nervous system is sensitized. That is the whole purpose of this channel. It's also to help you reframe your thinking into constant coping or managing strategies. It feels like in this world, the only thing that they can provide you to help is just to cope, is just to manage, is just to breathe through it. You see TikTok influencers talking about putting ice over here, or like pulling down your ear, or splashing water on your face. These are like quick surface level things that don't really go into the depth of healing. And so the purpose of this, learning that's anxiety, is to help you realize that, okay, in order to overcome this, in order to grow from this, I need to focus on long-term freedom. This isn't an overnight fix. In many ways, that's the purpose of this channel, is to show you what to expect on the healing journey. But before we even get into that, it's important to set expectations. Understanding it's anxiety, this is where people start getting this aha moment. Okay, I understand now why anxiety creates all this. At this stage, what I find is people still don't have a clear answer for why they're experiencing symptoms, but it's a good starting point. For me, this was when I was at the ER, when I had a doctor basically tell me, you don't look that sick. And I told him, I feel like I'm gonna die. And he's like, we can run a bunch of tests, but this is anxiety and this is how it works. And I hated that doctor at that moment. I feel like he didn't understand. I felt abandoned, like all the other people that were trying to help me that told me that this was anxiety. And so I made him go through every test. Every single Google search that I had done in the past started coming up. I want to test for this. What about that? And then the doctor was trying to tell me, look, this is how anxiety works. This is how it works. That was the moment where I realized, okay, I'm actually not dealing with a physical issue. I'm actually dealing with anxiety. And this is where at least you can identify the problem, right? At that moment, I naively thought, okay, now I've identified the problem, now I can come out of it, right? What I didn't learn, which is what I'm sharing with you in this video, is that learning that it was anxiety is just the first step in the healing journey, right? So that's really where I say where my healing journey began. It's when I truly realized what I was dealing with anxiety. Now, this leads me to stage 2, which is the foundations of recovery. This is where you begin understanding why you're having symptoms. Every symptom, you have an understanding for why it's happening, how anxiety, how this fight, flight, freeze response is causing these symptoms. You have an understanding of the symptoms. When you have an understanding, you naturally will lose the fear. People say, how do I stop fearing these symptoms? Well, if you know what's happening, that removes a lot of the fear. Now, what oftentimes people are really meaning is, how do I get rid of the discomfort? That goes on its own as you're on the healing journey. But it's important to understand the mechanics of anxiety, how anxiety works. And for everybody, anxiety manifests so differently. It's important that you know specifically your answer. This helps a lot of people, because even if I was to tell you the solution, which is, the alarm method, avoiding the 5 Fs, all those things, you're not going to take it seriously if you don't believe what you're going through is anxiety. Now, this is also where a lot of people get a little bit confused. They start thinking, okay, if Shaan's giving out all this content for free, why does he also have a program? Think about how nutrition works in today's day and age, right? Nutrition is a science that, people have figured out. They know that, if you count your macros, if you exercise, you're able to lose weight. Everybody knows that. And yet more people are overweight than ever before, right? If you think about somebody that's like a movie star that's going to work for a Marvel movie or a superhero movie, they're not going to tell the studio producers that, hey, listen, I've already read about nutrition. I watch these YouTube channels. I can do everything on my own. The studio heads are going to say, absolutely not. You need a nutritionist, you need a trainer. It doesn't matter. You need personal guidance. Because just understanding that this is a, diet and fitness thing isn't enough. This is why we help people on the healing journey. This is why what people think that just understanding anxiety is all that you need, that's just the first step. That just points you in the right direction. Going through the recovery roadmap, going through this journey, growing through this like healing and growth journey is a whole separate skill. And so having the guidance does a few things. It expedites you on the healing journey. You can get there faster. Number two, it normalizes your healing journey. You might be thinking that Shaan is the only person that understands what I'm going through. I promise you, it is not. There are people around the world that know exactly what you're going through. And in fact, many of these people are going through it right now themselves. So even when we're guiding people in their recovery programs, what we do is we focus on community. There's a reason for that. We want to normalize what you're going through. We want you to see other people that have not only gone through what you're going through, but is actively getting better. This normalizes the fact that you're not unique. It normalizes the fact that the symptoms you're going through isn't somehow like a personal thing that no one else deals with. You see people getting better rather than these forums where people are just stuck and just, in a victim mindset. You're seeing people actually progress because the people that progress, they're living their lives. They're not on these forums, right? So you see people actively getting better. And more importantly, the deeper principle is that it has to do with co-regulation. Being around people that are actively on the healing journey, people that are helping others on the healing journey, there's a certain nervous system co-regulation that happens, right? AI won't be able to solve for that. Google searching, even if the answers for recovery on Google, doesn't mean that you're not going to have that. For that, you need personal connection. You need connections with others, especially people that are going through the healing journey with you. Stage 2 is about understanding the mechanics. It's about learning the foundations of healing. It's about knowing why you're having these symptoms, understanding how anxiety works on its own. So this is step 2. Step 3. This is where you begin desensitizing your nervous system. This is where we mentioned the alarm method, right? This helps you calm those false alarms. Maybe you can do it in your room. Maybe you can do it in your house. But what happens if you're driving? What happens if you're going back to living? What if you are going back to work? What if you're going on vacation? You're going to have these different scenarios that come up where your symptoms are going to flare up. You're going to have these symptoms, sensations, feelings that are going to flare up. So just getting good in alarm in one context isn't enough. This is where you practice, right? So this is where you begin leaving your house, you go to the grocery store, you feel panic sensations, you respond, right? But going to a grocery store is very different from traveling or even skydiving. Stage 3 is about learning the alarm method, but being able to utilize it in daily life. Right? Like I mentioned, anxiety tends to take things away from you, right? I was somebody that was traveling freely. I was living on my own. I was in a whole separate country from my family. And what happened was when I was dealing with anxiety, I ended up moving back home. I lost my job. I didn't have an apartment. I lost all my money. I had to regain all those things, right? And so regaining those things while overcoming my symptoms were important. It wasn't like I had to overcome my symptoms and then regain. Part of healing is learning to go back to living. And so it's learning how to use the alarm method in different contexts. As you go back to living and you show up in different scenarios, your amygdala will start recalibrating. That's the part of your brain that basically sends the alarms, basically says threat, 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 right? That's the amygdala. It's a primitive part of your brain. It's part of the limbic structure. We don't need to get into the neuroscience of this, but just know that your amygdala is basically viewing everything as an alarm, as everything as a danger or threat. And so as you go back to living, the amygdala is going to fire saying threat, threat, threat. But because you're a conscious being, you are going to be teaching it that no, there's no threat, and you do that by your response. So then what happens is that the amygdala starts recalibrating. It starts saying, oh, okay, there is no threat. And so it basically starts recalibrating itself. And you do that recalibration through the alarm method. And what happens is that as you start applying this in different scenarios, you start seeing the symptoms start to drop off. Some symptoms will be a little bit more stubborn and stay a little bit longer. Some symptoms will drop off. Some symptoms you'll notice will even morph. They'll change into something else. And that's because as your nervous system is desensitizing, what you're going to see is that as the nerves desensitize, the symptoms manifest differently. So let's say if you're dealing with intense symptoms like, let's say, breathlessness, you start noticing that it might turn into, a knot in your stomach or something like that. The breathlessness is gone, but you might just feel like, you maybe yawn a lot, or, you have a knot in your stomach. We call this somatic shifting. The idea is that as your nervous system is desensitizing or regaining its balance, the symptoms change as well. Now, step 4 is about regaining confidence in your body and your mind. Believe it or not, just knowing that it's anxiety isn't going to bring you the confidence, right? This can all sound good in theory. This is all a good story. This is all a good narrative. But is this actually true? Think about all the times that you thought it was something else. Maybe something it wasn't anxiety. Maybe you thought it was something more serious. And then you'd go to your doctors and then they would dispel that myth right away. That story felt so convincing. If you would Google search or if you would try to figure out what's going on and you would ask other people that had gone through similar things, you might have gone that route and figured that doesn't help you. So that was another narrative that was false. And so what happens is that people need to see the symptoms lift. People need to see that they're getting better. That's when they start regaining confidence in their body and mind. Confidence doesn't come first. What happens is that confidence follows courage. As you begin responding, as you start showing yourself, you'll see, okay, the symptoms begin to lift. Now, something that's interesting here, something that we find is that often people that are going through the healing journey themselves, they are often the last people to see their progress. What they will find is that they will find that their family members see their progress before they do. The mentors will know exactly that they're doing better before they do, and just people around them. And a big reason why that's there is that we can see how your behaviors are changing. Internally, how you feel is how you feel, right? And so what happens is that your behaviors will change. We'll learn how to respond. And what happens is internally, you still feel intense symptoms, but your behaviors have changed, and that's very apparent from the outside. So this is how you'll notice your spouse, your family members, your kids will notice you're making progress, and you will feel the effects of it in a delayed fashion. Now, a lot of people think that if a symptom just disappeared, that means all their confidence will come back. But what happens is that if a symptom was to disappear, let's say I was supposed to do something right now and all your symptoms went away. Well, what you would find is you would ask yourself, okay, but how do I prevent myself from feeling that again? What if that shows up? And so what happens is that when people are on the healing journey, when they're at this stage, they start dealing with setbacks. They start dealing with how to respond when their symptoms come back full force. When people haven't focused on the first few steps of the healing journey, this can floor them. This can feel like a glass ceiling. No matter what they do, they fall back in the cycle. And in fact, a lot of times when people are on the fence of even wanting to work with us or not, what will happen is they will make some progress on their own, and then they'll hit a setback, and their setback makes them come back to step 1. They basically spiral all the way back down. And so what it is that they haven't still understood the fundamental principles of the healing journey. There's still gaps in their healing journey, which is preventing them from having those breakthroughs, from breaking through those setbacks. So in this stage, you start getting good at handling setbacks. And you start seeing that as you respond, the setbacks disappear on their own. And so what happens is that the gaps between the good days basically become wider. You get more and more good days. And then the bad days, they might show up a little bit here and there, but over time, the intensity of the bad days drop. And so in this stage, this is where you are able to deal with setbacks. This is where you're able to get your core confidence. Core confidence we describe as being confident no matter what situation you're in. Doesn't matter if you're jumping out of a building or if you're waking up in the morning, whatever shows up in your body, you know what's going on. You also fundamentally understand, finally, that you were never broken to begin with, right? Your body was not sick. There was nothing wrong. Your body was just reacting based on how you were teaching it. And so you start realizing that what's happening isn't a defect in the body. In fact, the body was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. The mind was doing everything it was supposed to do. And so as you start recognizing that, you start realizing, okay, what are the unproductive habits that were keeping this alive? Now, that would be step 5. But before we go into step 5, let's take a moment and help you understand that when you're up to stage 4, you are basically living normally for the most part. That doesn't mean that the symptoms have fully gone away. Your symptoms would have reduced substantially, but you would still have some pretty off days. In fact, you would still have days where you feel like, okay, you're doing much better, but then the anxiety just hits you. And when it does, it feels like it floors you. Sometimes it's very surprising. There's a big shock value in the fact that you're doing fine, your nerves are okay, and then all of a sudden, you'll experience a little setback and it will just hit you like a train. And so at this stage, this is where people are going back to living. They're not thriving by any means, but they're able to take care of themselves. There's a little bit more independence there. They might be doing things in life and internally they might not feel great, but from the external standpoint, they're back to living. It's almost like, they still have their training wheels on and they're still kind of balancing on, like riding a bike. You're barely holding on your balance, but you're still moving. You're still actually like going places for once. So this is the stage where people are at. And this is where, this limbo of healing is there, because externally, the things that you've been wanting to do, you're doing, but your internal emotions, your internal feelings, that hasn't caught up yet. Now, step 5 is very important because this is where you start moving from the stabilization to going beyond recovery and thriving. This is the stage where people start going into the unproductive thinking habits, the behaviors, the thought patterns that they had that kept them stuck in the cycle. Some of these examples I've given in previous videos, like having this perfectionistic idea that like, oh, I need to be fully recovered in order to live, or I need to do something extremely well. And then you add all this pressure to yourself, and that pressure ends up causing more stress to your nervous systems. Or you had an identity, I'm always an anxious person, or I need to do this to impress XYZ, or do this or do that. And you start realizing that these are just identities. These are just things that, you made up in your head. And so another unproductive thinking habit, and again, there's so many of them. These are just some general ones, is being goal-oriented versus being process-oriented. People are still, even at this stage, they fall back into the habit of thinking recovery is this finish line. Okay, I just need to recover. Okay, if I'm not recovering, I'm doing something wrong, right? And they look at this world as a wrong, right, good, bad lens. And the truth is that these are still human concepts that we've come up with in many ways. And so it's learning to drop these narratives. It's learning to drop all these things in terms of your healing journey. It's learning to give yourself some grace. It's learning to give yourself some compassion. It's letting yourself honor what you're feeling in the moment without any judgment. So at this stage, people start going deeper. Now, what's fascinating about step 5 is that, yes, this is applicable to anxiety recovery, but now it starts applying to other aspects of your life. What are other aspects and what are other domains in your life where you might have similar patterns, where you had some preconceived notions that you thought were true, but were actually not true? This is where recovery begins shifting. It's no longer about recovery. It's no longer about overcoming these symptoms. It's about growing. It's about growth. It's about thriving. And so what happens at this stage is that people outgrow recovery. What I often find is that a lot of people get stuck in this stage where they're constantly in recovery. Okay, I'm still in the recovery journey. 2 years goes by, 3 years, 5 years, and they're still in the recovery journey. Recovery is not supposed to be that long. And sometimes I find what happens is people get stuck. They get stuck in this stabilization where they're always in the healing journey, where they're always recovering. It's like, I've been 2 years, 3 years, 4 years in the recovery journey. When people say that to me, I often think that they're actually stuck in this recovery journey, that actually constantly healing, constantly being in recovery is actually comfortable for people. When you're in the healing journey, that's good, but you also have to outgrow that too, right? You can't always be in the healing journey because you're still making anxiety the most important part of your life. There's a certain point where you learn to let this go. Now, people only want to let things go when their symptoms are gone. But in order for the symptoms to go away, you need to let this go. And so what happens is people get stuck in stage 5 where they're still in that stabilization and they're not transitioning into outgrowing this. That it's no longer about constantly overcoming these symptoms or doing these things to focus on your anxiety recovery. You're doing these things because you care about this. These are based on your own values, your own alignment, whether that's going to school, choosing a certain job, being with somebody, doing the things you enjoy, just living life based on your terms. And so this is the transition where people start going from focused on recovery to outgrowing recovery. I know this is a little bit complicated. I know this is a little bit nuanced, but try to follow me here. In the beginning of this video, I mentioned how when people are on the healing journey, especially when they're new to embark it, they think they're further along than they actually are. You know, they might think they're in stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, when really they're barely at stage 1. What I find in these later stages is that people actually are further along. Once they hit this stage, they're further along than they think. So they think they need more recovery, but they don't need more recovery. They need to outgrow this and go into deeper things. Now it's about going deeper into the onion layer. It's about going into deeper things about you. You're not going into deeper layers because you're trying to recover anymore. You're not doing this with the sole purpose of trying to recover. You're going into these deeper layers because you've learned that in the recovery journey, there were certain habits that you had that kept you stuck. What are other habits that you have in other parts of your life that's holding you back? These things could be people pleasing. You know, you want to please your boss, and so you pick up more than you can handle. This is not being able to set boundaries in relationships, and so when people cross it, you feel resentful. This is where you have procrastination habits. This is where you put an unnecessary pressure on yourself, and you feel like you should be doing this and should be doing that, and you're not doing it. So then you add more pressure to yourself. Do you notice how these things have nothing to do with anxiety in terms of a nervous system issue anymore? This deals with anxiety that has to deal with life. This happens from living life. Now, here's the important thing, and this is where it gets critical here, okay? This is probably one of the most important parts of the video. Once people are able to stabilize themselves, desensitize their nervous system, that skill is always great, and you will never abandon that. But alarming and responding, by avoiding the 5 Fs, it's not that it doesn't work. After a certain point, it becomes incomplete. When you go back to living, now it's about using other tools along with alarming, right? So think about it this way. When you're dealing with intense anxiety, you're in the middle of a storm, right? The alarm method will help stabilize you. Think of it as a life vest, right? And so the life vest is there, but you're not always in a storm. And sometimes the water is calm and you can be swimming, right? And so sometimes you'll have waves and you'll have currents that pull you back and forth a little bit. And so the idea isn't to let go of the life jacket. It's not to let go of the life vest. Still always have the alarm method, but now it's about utilizing your arms. It's about learning how to swim. It's about learning more tools on top of this. The reason why this is important is you can learn the mechanics of anxiety. You can learn how to destabilize your nervous system. That's great for any time you have, a life storm that is thrown at you. But whenever you're trying to do things and really live a full life, you will naturally experience challenges. If you don't know how to handle these challenges that are from the external world, and many of these challenges you have no control over, like what challenge happens to you, maybe your dog passes away, a family issue happens, a relationship thing happens, these things you can't control. But the answer isn't just to alarm it all the time, right? Alarming is limited. And so the idea at this stage is about, yes, alarm is important, but now it's about going beyond this. This is stuff that I have never mentioned on this channel before. You want to ask yourself, why hasn't Shaan mentioned this on the channel ever before? And the answer is, it's not relevant to you. Your biggest focus on this journey, the main important thing is stabilization. And so in stabilization, you don't need to go into these deeper concepts. You don't need to go into the unproductive thinking habits, going into subconscious beliefs, going into identity work, and all these things that you focus on the growth journey and the thriving journey, because you're focused on healing right now. And for healing, you need a few tools, right? Understanding the mechanics, learning how to respond, regaining your confidence, dealing with setbacks, making sure you never fall back into the cycle. Here's a great analogy. Think of when your anxiety symptoms flare up and are really intense. You're in a rowboat. So you have those, like let's say a canoe or something like that. And you have your oars with you and you are swimming your way. It's very manual, right? And so it helps you with the storm. It helps you steer. But when the storm is calm, well, you don't want to be steering all the time. You want to have a sail. And so when you have a sail, then the wind pushes you. Then like the wind of life pushes you in the right direction. You're not fighting it. So think of it this way. The first process is stabilization. Think about that as turning down your false alarms. These alarms, desensitizing it, turning them off. When it comes to this growth journey, when it comes to this thriving journey, now it's about rewiring your nervous system. So the first one is about calming the alarms, desensitizing your nervous system. The second is rewiring. And so that's where stage 5 really starts, and stage 5 to stage 9 focuses on that. Now it's about learning to rewire your nervous system. This comes through identity work. This comes to understanding subconscious belief patterns. And the reason why people often go into childhood trauma stuff or childhood is because a lot of the belief patterns that you developed happened when you were a kid. Now, why was it when you were a kid? Well, you don't have an intellect. Well, you do have an intellect, but your intellect isn't fully formed. So whatever something happens to you, you automatically accept it as true. If something was to happen to you right now, you would intellectually think about whether this is true or not. But when you're young and your intellect hasn't fully formed. So whenever certain things happen to your life, you automatically assume it to be true. And what happens is that it served you when you were a child. So whenever you believe something, well, it helped you when you were younger. But then at a certain point, you outgrow that. At a certain point, what was true when you were younger or true in the past might not be true now. If you want to get to the next stage of life, if you want to outgrow, if you want to truly thrive, you have to ask yourself, what are the limiting patterns that are holding you back? What are some belief patterns that you might have that you didn't choose, that wasn't your choice? You just accepted it as fact. You just accepted these values as fact. It wasn't your choice. It wasn't a conscious choice. What are those things that are holding you back? And what do you want to actively choose? This is where we get into stage 6. Stage 6 is redefining who you are, especially within the context of not having anxiety. This is where you start asking, I just went through something that was so debilitating and I'm making progress and I'm doing better. How do I want my life to be? Many times people that are on the anxiety cycle, before they fell in, they thought certain things were important in their life, but then when they had anxiety and it was so debilitating, they start getting perspective. They start realizing, you know what, that wasn't the most important thing. The things that I was working on before, that wasn't the most important. These things are important. So now, because I've gotten my life back, because I'm doing much better, I want to focus on these things. And so it's about internally making those shifts. Now, for a lot of people, they will have a thermostat set point, meaning there will be a certain place where they feel safe. This is an upper limit, and then this is a lower limit. So everyone has an internal thermostat. And so what happens is that when you start wanting to dream big, whenever you want to do bigger things, well, it can naturally cause anxiety because you're not used to it. And your internal thermostat is set to a certain level. And when your goals are here, what can happen is that even if you achieve it, people find ways to sabotage themselves because they're not used to the internal thermostat. The thermostat is still showing that they're on the lower end. And so this is where you see a lot of people, for example, that are wanting to achieve things, but then every time they get close to it, they sabotage. And a lot of times this happens because when you're going through the anxiety recovery journey, you're so used to feeling pain, you're so used to feeling anguish, you're so used to feeling stress, that not feeling stress is very weird. You're not used to it. It's not a bad thing, you're just not used to it. And so what happens is people end up sabotaging themselves. So in stage 6, this is where you have to do the internal work. You have to reset that thermostat. Let me give you an example. Have you ever heard of those stories of people that win $100 million in lottery? And they make all this money and then they blow it. They blow it in like 2 or 3 years. Not often do they just blow it and lose all that money, but sometimes they're even in more debt. How is that possible? How can somebody make all this money and then just lose it? They surpassed their thermostat, even in the positive way. And because they weren't used to it, they unconsciously found ways to sabotage themselves. And so they ended up blowing it because they're not used to that type of wealth. They're not used to that type of energy. Their nervous system wasn't primed for that. And so because of that, they found ways to sabotage. And so the answer isn't to not want these things. It's about learning to regulate your thermostat, identifying where your thermostat is at. And so this is the stage where you'll notice where people are really pushing their capacity. This is where they're expanding. And when they're expanding, it's also uncomfortable. and their ego will pop up and all these other things will surface up. But they're pushing their boundaries not to overcome anxiety anymore. They're focused on this expansion because they just want more out of life. This is now about them. It's no longer about anxiety. They've outgrown it. Once they start doing this internal work, now it's step 7, which is, okay, I've been doing the internal work. Now, how do I want my external environment to be? This is where step 7 is about rebuilding your life based on your design. In other words, rebuilding a life based on intention. You begin choosing relationships, habits, behaviors that serve in alignment with who you want to be. These are conscious decisions that you've made. This is where you start intentionally doing the things that you want to do. You're no longer taking a job because of survival. You're no longer getting in a relationship because you're afraid of being alone. You're working into what do you truly want, and how do you want to build a life that's in alignment with what you want. Not what other people consider success, but what you consider success based on your own terms. But it's important for people to realize that this happens after an internal shift. The focus is on having the internal shift, and then the external shift happens on its own. When people say your external environment is just a mirror of your internal environment, that's 100% true. What happens is people often try to fix their external environment and thinking that will make them happy, and that doesn't happen. I remember I used to go to Tulum, Mexico a lot, which, nobody heard of at this time. It was really quiet. This was like maybe 2016, 2017. And I would see a lot of digital nomads there. And I could tell that the reason why they moved there and these beautiful beaches and this amazing food, and it felt like paradise, when I would start talking to them, I started realizing that they were actually running from internal things. And what I actually found is that they were dealing with this internal pull where they felt from the external environment, everything was great. They were living in paradise, but they didn't feel happy. They didn't feel fulfilled. And a big reason for that was because they hadn't worked on the inner self. They thought that if they just left wherever they lived, they left all the drama, they left whatever they needed to, and then just go somewhere that was paradise, life would be great. But what happened is that what they were running from wasn't necessarily external situations, which might have been true, but there was a lot of internal situations that they hadn't resolved. So that followed them there. And it's the same way in this growth journey. It's about having the internal shift first. Now, this finally brings us to stage 8, which is learning how to expand your capacity. Basically, how can you expand your capacity even before you fell into the cycle? See, even before I fell into the anxiety cycle, I wasn't somebody that was very anxious per se. At least I hadn't identified that. You may or may not have. But the idea is that can you even push your capacity beyond what you did even before you fell in the cycle? When I refer to expanding your capacity, I mean being able to do more things than you would have ever done before. That means being able to handle uncertainty more than before, being able to take calculated risks more than before, not having the fear of failure or overthinking, and pursuing what you truly want, being able to expand your capacity. See, people think that people doing big things, that they're not scared, that they don't have fear, that they don't have doubts. That's not true. The only thing is they're really good at handling them. They're really good at responding to them. They're able to deal with uncertainty. They're able to take those risks. They're able to do things that might naturally scare other people because they have the internal confidence in themselves. And this stage, you start really asking yourself, what is my limit? What am I really wanting to do? How do I reach my full potential? Someone going through the healing journey, you have such a unique, amazing vantage point. You've gone through so much. You've gone through such a growth journey. In many ways, it feels like you regained your life. While other people were just given life, like you almost had to fight for it in many ways. And now it's asking yourself, okay, what do I want to do with this life? Many people think that life is recovery. Life is not recovery. The prize for recovery is life. The prize for recovery isn't these symptoms going away. It's being able to live fully, freely, authentically, with integrity. Really going into that spiritual dimension, that deeper layer, really asking yourself, who am I? Am I not these thoughts? And being able to push past your boundaries and expand your capacity. This is what life is about. You'll learn very quickly that the purpose of life in many ways is to grow, is to evolve, right? To evolve spiritually, to evolve in all these different domains. It's just genuinely being able to grow. That's why you're here in life. What you will find at this stage is not only has your nervous system come back to baseline, but it can even handle more. Your baseline is even higher than most people. You can deal with more intensity because you've worked on yourself. You built yourself from the ground up. You're stronger, more grounded, and you show up in an even more powerful way than you would have before the cycle. Now, this leads me to stage 9, which is turning your pain into purpose. Going through something like this, you will start recognizing that life in many ways is about service. It's about helping other people. I don't look at it as this binary thing where you work on yourself and you work on other people or you help other people. I look at it as all the same. And so what happens is that at this stage, people start recognizing, going through so much suffering, going through so much pain, you'll start recognizing that you don't want to see other people going through that. And so you will start focusing on how to use this journey that you've gone through and how to apply and help other people. That doesn't mean that makes you an anxiety coach or you do what I do by any means. In fact, I think a lot of people want to do what I would do, but I don't think they really want to do that. I think genuinely they want to help others and improve quality of life, but it doesn't have to be in this domain. You can focus on your strengths and focus on what ways do you help others. This is where you realize that true happiness comes from a life of service. It's helping other people. That can be in any different aspect, in relationships, in finance, in education, in the public sector, in NGOs, whatever it is, truly doing things to help other people and improving their quality of life. And you're doing this because you've gone through so much, right? This is where you turn your pain into purpose. Everything you went through, there was a reason for it. You going through this, there was a reason for all this. Exploring what that reason is. Finding out, how do you want to help? What do you want to do? How do you make this world a better place? And here's the most important thing. You're no longer defined by what you've gone through, but what are the skills that you've developed and who have you become as a consequence of that? This will just be inherent in who you are. This is just naturally embedded in who you are. It's baked in. You will see other people having trust, having reliance, having more confidence in you just because this is who you are. Not necessarily because you went through the healing journey. Yes, that's a part of it, but this is just embodied in you. You embody this. You embody this aspect that you're someone that's there to help, to serve, and to just improve quality of life, or just helping people in a way that people just rely on you. And it's hard to describe, but you will see going through something like this, people will naturally trust you, rely on you, and you'll be somebody that, people can count on. See the difference from someone that, can be counted on all the way back from, maybe when you were agoraphobic or you couldn't leave your house or you couldn't rely on other people. And so imagine this growth journey. And by the way, Stage 9 doesn't end there. There's more stages, but I think for the purpose of this masterclass, we're going to stick to stage 9. Now, as we've gone through this masterclass, you have two options. You can continue doing this on your own, focusing on the tools, focusing on getting better, identifying where you are on the stage, understanding the mechanics of anxiety, responding, and moving forward with the recovery roadmap. Or you can find guidance and have someone help you on the healing journey. It just depends on what you want based on this stage and where you want to be. If you want to try it on your own, great. If you feel like you get stuck and you feel like it's too difficult, if it's too hard, don't be surprised. Most people feel that way. Then find someone to guide you on the healing journey. If you want that to be us, I'll put a link down below where you can apply for the recovery program. We have been doing this like clockwork. We know what's happening. What I ask for you is that if you do decide to apply and you do decide to join, you fully commit. You recognize that you're going to be doing some things that might feel uncomfortable for you, but you're focused on long-term freedom. And you recognize that this is going to be an amazing growth journey, and if you utilize it correctly, you're going to be going through these stages of healing. And not only will you have to not figure it out and identify where you're at, but you will see that there will be certain blind spots that you have that will need to get rectified. And that's why we're here. That's why we do this. And so just know that it's going to be an incredible journey. And I hope you're excited. So I hope this video helps. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.